Carl Jung discovered something that will shatter everything you thought you knew about that one person who changed your life but couldn't stay in it. According to his lifelong research into the deepest chambers of human consciousness, if you've experienced what people call a twin flame connection, you've encountered something far more profound than a soulmate, far more devastating than heartbreak, and far more purposeful than any conventional relationship could ever be. But here's what Jung found that nobody talks about. The very reason you met this person, the magnetic pull that defied all logic, the recognition that felt like coming home to someone you'd never met before, all of it was orchestrated by forces in your unconscious mind that knew something your rational self couldn't possibly understand. You were never meant to build a life with them. You were meant to build a new life because of them. Most people spend their entire existence sleepwalking through relationships, choosing partners based on compatibility, convenience, shared interests, practical considerations. But you experienced something that tore through all of that superficiality like lightning through darkness. You met someone who didn't just attract you, they awakened you. Jung would have recognized this immediately as what he called a syzygy encounter, a meeting between two souls that triggers profound psychological transformation in both individuals, regardless of whether they can actually be together. This isn't about romance. This isn't about finding your other half. This is about your psyche recognizing a catalyst so powerful that even separation cannot diminish the transformation it initiates. You've probably tortured yourself wondering why this happened. Why did the universe allow you to meet someone who felt more real than reality itself, only to make being together impossible? Why does this person still occupy territories in your heart that no one else can access, even years after you've accepted you can't be with them? Why does their absence somehow feel more present than other people's company? Jung spent decades documenting these patterns, and what he discovered will completely reframe everything you've been telling yourself about this connection. The painful truth Jung uncovered is that twin flame connections aren't designed for conventional partnership. They're designed for psychological death and rebirth. The person you call your twin flame entered your life as a mirror, reflecting back aspects of yourself that were buried so deeply you didn't know they existed. Parts of you that needed to awaken, shadows that needed to be confronted, potential that needed to be activated. And here's the part that changes everything. The intensity you felt. That recognition that transcended all rational understanding. That wasn't love in the traditional sense. It was your soul recognizing its own reflection in another human being, seeing its completeness outside itself so it could finally begin the journey of finding that completeness within. If you've ever met someone who felt like they were made from the same star as you, someone whose presence changed the entire trajectory of your life, even though you couldn't build a life with them, I want you to pause here and ask yourself this question, and maybe share it in the comments if it resonates. What version of yourself died when you met this person? Because Jung discovered that this death, this complete dismantling of who you were before, wasn't the tragedy. It was the entire point. Jung identified something revolutionary about twin flame encounters that modern psychology completely misses. He called it the phenomenon of projected completion, but it's far more intricate than simple projection. When you meet your twin flame, you're not just projecting your ideals onto another person. You're encountering someone who carries the exact psychological material you've been unconsciously seeking your entire life. The qualities in them that you find irresistible, that draw you like gravity, those aren't random attractions. They're the undeveloped aspects of your own psyche calling out to be integrated. Think about the person you couldn't be with. What was it about them that captivated you beyond reason? Was it their creative fire, their emotional depth, their courage to live authentically, their willingness to feel everything deeply, their refusal to play by society's rules, their way of seeing beauty in darkness? Jung would ask you to consider this carefully because those qualities you recognized in them, those traits that made them feel like home, they're the exact qualities your soul is trying to develop within yourself. The twin flame appears not to complete you through union, but to show you what completion looks like so you can begin cultivating it independently. This explains why twin flame connections feel simultaneously like the most natural thing in the world and the most impossible. Your unconscious mind orchestrated this meeting because it knew you needed to see your own potential reflected in human form. You needed to experience what it feels like when someone embodies the very qualities your soul is hungry to express. But the relationship itself, the practical partnership, that was never the goal. The awakening was the goal. The mirror was the goal. The initiation into becoming more fully yourself was always the entire point. Jung documented hundreds of cases where twin flame encounters preceded massive life transformations. People who were playing small suddenly found their voice. People who were hiding their gifts suddenly began sharing them. People who were living according to others' expectations suddenly started honoring their own truth. The twin flame connection didn't cause these transformations by being present. It caused them by reflecting back a version of the person they were capable of becoming. The separation, as agonizing as it feels, often serves as the space where that transformation can actually occur. But here's what Jung found most fascinating about this pattern. Twin flame connections almost always involve what he called the activation of the anima and animus, the contrasexual aspects of the psyche. When a man meets his twin flame, he's encountering his own feminine aspects reflected in external form. When a woman meets her twin flame, she's seeing her own masculine energy embodied in another person. This recognition feels so profound, so complete, because you're literally seeing parts of yourself that you've never consciously acknowledged. The person becomes a bridge to your own wholeness. The magnetic pull you felt wasn't just attraction. It was your psyche's desperate attempt to reclaim the parts of yourself you'd abandoned, suppressed, or never knew existed. And here's the paradox that Jung understood, but most people struggling with twin flame separation don't. The more you chase union with the external person, the further you move from the internal integration their presence was meant to trigger. Carl Jung made a disturbing discovery about why twin flame connections are structured around impossibility rather than partnership. He found that if these connections were easy, if the union was simple and the relationship practical, the entire psychological purpose would be defeated. The obstacles, the distance, the timing that never aligns, the circumstances that keep you apart, these aren't cruel cosmic jokes. They're essential components of the transformation these encounters are designed to catalyze. When you can't have the person, when you can't build a conventional relationship with them, something remarkable happens in your psyche. All the energy you would normally pour into maintaining a partnership, all the focus you would direct toward building a shared life, all of that gets redirected inward. You're forced to sit with the feelings they awakened rather than acting on them. You're compelled to explore the qualities they reflected rather than simply enjoying them in their presence. The impossibility becomes a container for the most intense inner work most people will ever do. Jung observed that people who try to force twin flame connections into conventional relationships often find that the magic disappears. The moment you succeed in making it practical, the moment you overcome the obstacles and settle into partnership, something essential evaporates. Why? Because the connection was never about building a life together. It was about destroying the limited life you were living and rebuilding something far more authentic. Once that transformation begins, the external catalyst is no longer necessary in the same way. This doesn't mean twin flames can never be together. Jung documented cases where, after both individuals completed their necessary psychological work, after each person integrated the qualities the other reflected, after the desperate neediness transformed into sovereign wholeness, some twin flames did eventually form partnerships. But these relationships looked nothing like conventional unions. They were collaborations between two whole individuals rather than fusions between two incomplete halves. And crucially, both people had to reach that wholeness independently, often during periods of separation. But for most people, Jung found, the twin flame serves a different function entirely. They appear to crack you open, to show you possibilities for how deeply you can feel, how authentically you can live, how courageously you can love. Then they step back, leaving you with a choice. Will you spend your energy chasing the person who reflected these qualities? Or will you use that energy to develop those qualities within yourself? Will you remain fixated on the external mirror? Or will you finally look at what the mirror was showing you? The truth Jung discovered is that twin flame separation creates a specific kind of suffering that conventional breakups don't. When a normal relationship ends, you grieve the loss of partnership, companionship, shared future. But when a twin flame connection becomes impossible, you're grieving something far deeper. You're mourning the loss of seeing yourself reflected back in another human being. You're aching for that moment when someone looked at you and you felt completely recognized for the first time in your life. You're longing for the version of yourself that came alive in their presence. But Jung issued a crucial warning about twin flame connections that most spiritual teachings completely ignore. There's a shadow side to these encounters that can trap you in cycles of suffering that prevent the very growth they're meant to catalyze. He discovered that some individuals become psychologically addicted to the intensity of twin flame longing, precisely because it allows them to avoid the terrifying work of actually becoming the person their twin flame reflected. Here's the pattern Jung observed in his clinical work. Some people use twin flame separation as a beautiful excuse to never fully show up in their actual lives. They remain perpetually waiting, perpetually hoping, perpetually focused on a connection that exists more in the realm of possibility than reality. Meanwhile, years pass. Available relationships are dismissed because nobody matches the intensity of the twin flame. Career opportunities are ignored because the inner world of longing feels more compelling than outer world action. Personal growth is intellectualized but never embodied, because the fantasy of eventual reunion is more comfortable than the risk of real transformation. Jung called this the twin flame trap, and he considered it one of the most sophisticated forms of psychological avoidance he'd ever encountered. Because unlike obvious forms of stagnation, this one feels spiritual. It feels profound. It feels like you're honoring something sacred by remaining devoted to this impossible connection. But what you're actually doing is using the twin flame narrative as protection against the vulnerability required to fully live. If you're always waiting for your twin flame, you never have to risk showing up completely with someone available. If you're always processing twin flame energy, you never have to take concrete action toward building the life you're capable of living. The question Jung would ask you, and I want you to honestly consider this, maybe even share your reflection in the comments if you're brave enough, is this: has your twin flame connection expanded your life, or has it become your life? Has it opened you to greater authenticity, or has it become a place to hide from authentic living? Has the separation inspired you to develop the qualities they reflected, or has it given you permission to remain in perpetual waiting, perpetual preparation, perpetual someday? Because Jung found that the real twin flame journey isn't about union with the other person. It's about union with yourself. Every quality you saw in them that captivated you, you're meant to cultivate within yourself. Every way they made you feel, you're meant to learn to generate independently. Every glimpse of authenticity you experienced in their presence, you're meant to embody consistently in their absence. The twin flame reflects completion, but you're meant to become that completion rather than chase it in external form. This is where most people misunderstand the entire purpose of these connections. They think the goal is to do enough inner work to finally be worthy of union. They believe that if they heal enough, grow enough, transform enough, the universe will reward them by bringing the twin flame back. But Jung discovered something that completely inverts this understanding. The more you genuinely transform, the less you need the external person. The more you integrate what they reflected, the less urgent the union becomes. Not because you love them less, but because you found in yourself what you were seeking in them. Carl Jung identified something that revolutionizes how we understand twin flame separation. He discovered that these connections operate according to what he called synchronistic principles rather than causal ones. This means the meeting, the timing, the obstacles, the periods of union and separation, none of it unfolds according to conventional cause and effect. These encounters are orchestrated by deeper patterns in the collective unconscious, patterns that are responding to the soul's readiness for transformation rather than the ego's desires for relationship. This explains why twin flame connections so often involve impossible timing. You meet when one or both of you are already committed to someone else. You connect when you live on opposite sides of the world. You recognize each other at life stages when partnership simply isn't possible. And when you do manage to come together, circumstances conspire to pull you apart again. From the ego's perspective, this looks like cosmic cruelty. But from the psyche's perspective, it's precise orchestration. The unconscious knows exactly what kind of container is needed for the transformation each person requires. Jung found that twin flame encounters often occur at critical transition points in psychological development. You meet them when you're on the verge of a major life change but haven't quite found the courage to make it. You connect with them when you're questioning everything about the life you've built, but don't yet have permission to tear it down. You recognize them when your soul is ready to evolve but your conscious mind is still clinging to old patterns. The twin flame appears as a catalyst, their presence making the life you were living suddenly feel unbearable, forcing the transformation your soul was already preparing for. But here's what Jung understood that modern twin flame teachings miss. The separation isn't something to overcome, it's something to honor. Every period of distance from your twin flame is an invitation to turn inward, to do the psychological work that external union would actually prevent. When they're not there, when you can't rely on their presence to make you feel alive, you're forced to find that aliveness within yourself. When you can't access their energy, you're compelled to develop that energy independently. When their reflection isn't available, you finally have to look directly at yourself. Jung observed that people who honor the separation, who use it as intended, who resist the urge to force contact or manipulate circumstances, these people undergo the most profound transformations. They emerge from periods of separation with gifts they never possessed before, creativity they never expressed, courage they never embodied, authenticity they never risked. The twin flame's absence creates a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. That empty space becomes the birthplace of everything you were always meant to become, but never had reason to develop while you could lean on their reflection. Think about who you were before you met this person. Now consider who you've become since separation began. What capacities have emerged? What truths have you finally spoken? What aspects of yourself have you given permission to exist? Jung would tell you that these emergent qualities, these new expressions of your authentic self, these weren't caused by the separation. They were always within you, waiting for the right conditions to surface. The twin flame's absence created those conditions. Carl Jung made a profound observation about the actual purpose of twin flame connections that completely transforms their meaning. He discovered that these encounters aren't romantic at all, at least not in the conventional sense. They're initiatory. The twin flame appears in your life to initiate you into a completely different relationship with love itself, with yourself, with reality. And the initiation requires destruction before reconstruction can begin. When you meet your twin flame, everything you thought you knew about love gets obliterated. All your strategies for relationship that worked before suddenly fail. All your attempts to secure connection, to control outcomes, to make sense of what you're feeling, they collapse under the intensity of what you're experiencing. This dissolution isn't accidental, it's the point. Jung understood that the psyche sometimes needs to completely dismantle your existing frameworks before new ones can emerge. The twin flame connection is so intense, so all-consuming, so impossible to categorize or control, that it breaks down every defense mechanism you've spent a lifetime constructing. Most people experience this breaking as failure. They blame themselves for not being healed enough, evolved enough, ready enough for the connection. They interpret the impossibility of the relationship as evidence of their unworthiness. But Jung would see this completely differently. The breaking isn't happening because you're doing something wrong. The breaking is what's supposed to happen. You're being initiated into love that doesn't require possession, connection that doesn't depend on proximity, devotion that doesn't demand reciprocation. These are advanced spiritual capacities that most humans never develop, and twin flame encounters serve as the brutal but effective training ground. Jung identified specific gifts that emerge from navigating twin flame separation with awareness. The first gift is psychological sovereignty. You learn that your capacity to love isn't diminished by whether that love can be expressed in partnership. You discover that your ability to feel deeply doesn't require the other person's presence to validate it. You develop an inner source of wholeness that no longer depends on external completion. This is extraordinarily rare. Most people spend their entire lives seeking completeness through others. You're learning to generate it independently while remaining capable of profound connection. The second gift Jung identified is what he called transpersonal love. You learn to love someone for their essence rather than for what they provide. You develop the capacity to celebrate another person's existence even when that existence doesn't include you. You discover that the deepest form of love is wanting someone to flourish according to their own nature, even when that flourishing takes them away from you. This transcends the ego's version of love, which is always conditional, always transactional, always ultimately about meeting your own needs. I want you to consider something, and maybe share your insight if it lands. What if your twin flame separation isn't preventing your happiness, but preparing you for a completely different kind of fulfillment than you ever imagined? What if the universe isn't keeping you from the person you're meant to be with, but is giving you time to become the person you're meant to be? Because Jung discovered that people who complete the twin flame initiation don't go back to who they were before. They emerge as something entirely new, carrying capacities for love and authenticity that make them unrecognizable to their former selves. Carl Jung discovered something extraordinary about people who successfully integrate twin flame experiences without getting trapped in perpetual longing. He found that they undergo what he called the alchemical marriage, but not with their twin flame. They achieve union with themselves. The masculine and feminine aspects within their own psyche finally come into balance. The conscious and unconscious minds begin cooperating rather than conflicting. The person becomes whole, not through finding their other half, but through integrating the halves that were always within them. This internal marriage is what the twin flame connection was pointing toward all along. Every moment you felt complete in their presence, you were actually experiencing temporary alignment with aspects of yourself that you normally keep hidden or undeveloped. Every time they made you feel seen, you were actually seeing yourself through their eyes, recognizing your own worth that you typically deny. Every quality in them that you found magnetic, you were encountering parts of your own psyche that you'd projected outward because you didn't know how to embody them directly. Jung taught that projection is the psyche's way of showing you what you need to integrate. When you fall in love with specific qualities in another person with an intensity that seems disproportionate, you're not really falling in love with them. You're falling in love with disowned aspects of yourself that they happen to embody. The twin flame encounter takes this mechanism to its extreme. The qualities they carry are so aligned with what your soul needs to develop that the attraction becomes overwhelming. But once you recognize this pattern, once you understand that they're a mirror rather than a destination, the entire relationship transforms. This doesn't make what you feel for them less real. If anything, it makes it more real because you're finally seeing the truth beneath the surface. You love them, but you also love what they represent. You long for them, but you also long for the version of yourself that awakens in their presence. You miss them, but you also miss the completeness you briefly touched when your projected qualities were reflected back to you through their being. Understanding this doesn't diminish the connection, it reveals its actual purpose. Jung found that when people successfully integrate their twin flame experience, when they stop chasing external union and start pursuing internal integration, something remarkable happens. They often attract new relationships that are simultaneously more grounded and more profound than the twin flame connection, because they're no longer seeking someone to complete them, or reflect them, or awaken them. They've done that work themselves. Now they're available for partnership between two whole beings rather than fusion between two fragments. But here's the paradox Jung observed. Sometimes after both individuals complete this integration, after each person becomes whole independently, after the desperate need for the other transforms into sovereign choice, the twin flames do come back together. But when they do, the relationship is completely different. There's no more obsession, no more suffering, no more feeling incomplete without the other. They come together as collaborators in continued growth rather than as seekers of missing pieces. The impossibility dissolves because the psychological purpose that required separation has been fulfilled. Whether your twin flame story ends in union or permanent separation, Jung insisted that the measure of success isn't whether you end up together, it's whether you end up whole. Did the encounter destroy the limited version of yourself you were living as? Did the separation force you to develop independently the qualities they reflected? Did the pain crack you open to depths you never would have discovered otherwise? Carl Jung's final teaching about twin flames was perhaps his most liberating. He discovered that these connections are never really about the other person at all. They're about you meeting yourself in the deepest way possible, recognizing your potential for wholeness in external form, so you could finally begin the journey of creating that wholeness internally. The twin flame was always a messenger, not a destination, and the message was simple. You are capable of far more love, depth, authenticity, and aliveness than you've been allowing yourself to express. Every quality you loved in them exists as potential within you. Every moment you felt alive in their presence revealed your capacity for that aliveness independently. Every recognition you experienced when they looked at you showed you how it feels to be truly seen, teaching you to see yourself with that same depth and honoring. They were never meant to be your permanent mirror. They were meant to show you what was possible so you could become your own reflection of completeness. Jung believed that twin flame encounters serve the evolution of consciousness itself. Every person who learns to love without possessing, to connect without controlling, to honor without claiming, they raise the frequency of what human relationship can become. You're not just healing your own heart. You're participating in the collective awakening of humanity's capacity for transcendent love. Your impossible connection wasn't personal failure. It was you being drafted into service of something far larger than individual happiness. If you're watching this and recognizing your own twin flame journey in these words, I want to honor you for the courage it takes to love this deeply, to feel this fully, to remain open even when everything in you wants to close down and protect itself. The path you're walking is not an easy one, but Jung would tell you that it's a sacred one. You're learning to love the way the universe loves, unconditionally, without agenda, celebrating existence for its own sake. Take a moment if you feel called to share in the comments what your twin flame taught you about yourself. Not about love, not about relationships, but about who you actually are beneath all the roles you've been playing. Because your story, your insight, your hard-won wisdom, it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to understand that their impossible love wasn't a mistake, but a masterclass in becoming whole. If this exploration of Jung's wisdom has helped you see your twin flame experience through new eyes, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd subscribe to continue this journey into the deeper psychology of human transformation. And if you know someone who's struggling with the twin flame connection, who's torturing themselves with questions about why this happened or what it means, please share this with them. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is help someone reframe their pain as sacred preparation. Thank you for trusting me with your time and for having the courage to explore territories of the heart that most people avoid. Your willingness to look deeply into your own experience is how consciousness evolves. Until we meet again in the next exploration of what it means to be human, may you find peace in knowing that the love you felt was real, the connection was purposeful, and the separation is teaching you to become everything you were always meant to be.